Have you ever gotten halfway through a drawing, looked at it and thought, yeah, I don't like this. Maybe I should just start over. Well, that's pretty much what happened while I was making this drawing. But instead of starting over, I decided to keep going and keep the mistakes in the video too. So you can see where I got confused, what didn't work out, and what I learned from fixing it. Now, if you watched my previous video, we learned how to draw a single water drop realistically. And when I found this reference on Pinterest, I thought it would just be perfect for part 2. So let's draw together. First, I've already prepped and toned my paper. If you don't know how I do that, I showed the process in my previous video. I can also make a separate video on different ways of toning paper if you guys like. Just let me know in the comments. Once the paper was ready, I started with a very basic sketch of architecture in the background. I'm not adding too much detail here because most of it will be seen through water drops anyway. For now, I'm mainly focusing on the placement and proportions. Now I'm going to build the background using willow charcoal. I also made some charcoal powder by rubbing the charcoal stick against sandpaper. I wanted both because, they gave me different values and textures. I started filling in building with the willow charcoal, but I felt like it wasn't getting dark enough, so I tried the charcoal powder with a brush. That wasn't quite giving me the result I wanted either. So I went back and forth between the charcoal powder, willow charcoal, and charcoal pencil. And that's something you will see throughout this drawing. Sometimes the material you start with isn't necessarily the one that works the best, so don't be afraid to change your approach. For the darker areas, I'm mainly using the willow charcoal, while the charcoal powder helps me create some softer, lighter areas. I'm basically trying to establish different values in the background because this is going to become really important once we start adding the water drops. If everything is around the same level of darkness, the drawing is just going to look flat. Once I had the basic background established, I started softening some areas with charcoal powder and a brush. I don't want all the edges to be perfectly crisp because we're looking at this architecture through a wet surface, so some areas should feel softer and less defined. Now we can start working on the water drops. I'm also keeping a clean piece of paper under my hand so I don't accidentally smudge the charcoal while working. Okay, now if you watched my previous video, you'll know that I normally draw the shape of the drop first and then build the shadows and highlights inside it or around it. That's what I started doing here too. But very quickly I realized that there were just too many water drops. If I drew every single on this way, this was going to take forever. And while I was using my electric eraser to create the highlights, I realized, why am I drawing all these shapes first when I can just erase them directly? Get me? So instead of drawing each water drop with a pencil, I started creating the shapes directly with my electric eraser. Basically, I'm using the negative space here. I'm removing the charcoal to create the lighter shape, and then I build the shadows around it. This made the process so much faster. And don't worry about making every drop perfectly circular. Look at your reference and vary the shapes. The variation is what helps the surface feel more natural. As I continued adding the drops, I noticed that the background looked too crisp. It didn't really feel like the architecture was behind a wet surface. So I started softening some of the edges with my brush, then I switched to my finger because it was quicker and blended nicely. Just be careful not to over smudge. If you lose too much darkness, simply go back in and add in again. For the rest of the paper, I went directly in with the electric eraser instead of drawing the drop shapes first. Once I have the basic shapes, I started adding the shadows. The shadows are actually what give the drops their three-dimensional appearance. I'm keeping some areas darker and others lighter, but I'm not making every drop exactly the same. Since all of these drops are working together as one surface, not every single drop needs to have the same amount of detail. Some can be very defined while others can be much simpler. Once I had most of the drops done, I stepped back and looked at the drawing, and honestly, I wasn't very happy with it. The drops were there, the details were there, but the whole thing looked flat. And that's when I realized that the problem wasn't really the water drop, it was contrast. You can add a lot of detail to the drawings, but if your values are too similar, it can still look flat. In my case, my background was simply too light. The lighter drops didn't have enough darkness behind them to stand out. So instead of adding even more detail to the water drops, I went back to the background. I took my charcoal pencil and I started making the darkest areas much darker. Where I wanted some soft transitions, I used some charcoal powder with a brush. After that, I kind of felt like that the water drops have started to stand out a little bit because now we have something darker to sit against. And this is why it's important to look at your drawing as a whole. Sometimes the problem isn't the area you're working on, it's what surrounds it. Now because I darkened the background, some of the lighter drops became less visible, so I'm going back in with my electric eraser and pulling those highlights out again. You don't need to give every drop the same amount of attention. The larger or more noticeable ones can have stronger contrast and more detail, while the smaller ones can be much simpler. This variation helps the whole surface feel more natural. Now I'm going back into some of the drops with my charcoal pencil and adding those really dark shadows, and this is where the drawing finally started to come together. So if your drawing ever feels dull or flat, before adding more detail, stop and ask yourself, do I actually need more detail or do I need more contrast? Sometimes simply making your darkest values darker can completely change the drawing. I also experimented with a white pen for a few extra highlights, but unfortunately my pen wasn't behaving very well, so I only used it on a few drops. And finally, we're done here. I'm actually quite satisfied with how this turned out, especially considering how many times I changed my approach while making it. I made a couple of mistakes, but I didn't need to start over. I just needed to understand where the drawing was missing. And I think that's something really important to remember, especially as a beginner. When your drawing doesn't look right halfway through, don't immediately give up on it. Step back and ask yourself, what is actually missing? You just have to keep observing, experimenting, and learning from what you're seeing, and that's how we improve. I hope you enjoyed drawing this with me, and if you haven't watched the first water drop tutorial yet, definitely check that one out because it will make this one much easier to follow. Thank you so much for watching. Bye bye and lots of love.